千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together.
There's a lot of good discussion waiting for us right up ahead. But first, we have to work our way through the structure of chapter 30. As I mentioned before, this is something that I don't think anyone does in the West. To actually work with the original text and identify the different sections from the original text, to be able to draw lines through the chapter, to be able to identify where the different sections are. And I think it's fun. I hope that you will agree. So the first task is to look through, for me to read through the chapter, and then we will all look through the Chinese characters together to see if we can identify the repeating identical characters from line to line. Tao Te Ching, chapter 30. The one who uses the Tao to advise the ruler does not dominate the world with soldiers. Such methods tend to be returned. The place where the troops camp, thistles and thorns grow. Following the great army, there must be an inauspicious year. A good commander achieves results, then stops, and does not dare to reach for domination. Achieves results, but does not brag. Achieves result, but does not flaunt. Achieves result, but is not arrogant. Achieves result, but only out of necessity. Achieves result, but does not dominate. Things become strong and then get old. This is called contrary to the Tao. That which is contrary to the Tao soon ends. Okay, I want to first identify an element, a thread, if you will, that has continued from 29. If you take a look at line 2, dominate the world, and then line 9, reach for domination, and then line 14, does not dominate. So let me point out the character that's repeating there. The third character from the end of the line in line 2, 强, dominate. The last character in line 9, 强, dominate. And then the last character in line 14, 强, again, dominate. So these are continuing the previous chapters idea and concept about trying to dominate and control the world. So this is another way to look at it, but this one is applying itself much more so in the realm of conflicts. Conflicts at every scale, from the scale of open warfare to the scale of you having an argument with someone else. So there's a Tao that applies up and down through the different levels, the different scales of life. Okay, now the challenge is to identify the repeating characters that will help us divide up the chapter into different sections. As you look up and down the different lines, can anyone identify characters that are repeating from one line to the next? If so, please feel free to type it in. And as you do that, I will reveal for you what I see as repeating characters. Now, it may not be easy. You kind of get used to this as you do more, but it may not be easy to identify the identical characters repeating from line to line, only because, looking at a Chinese character, a lot of people will just say, well, I can't make heads or tails of it. I don't recognize any of it. So the idea is to look at it pictorially or visually. When you do that, you may see the repeating lines here. And I see that quite a few of you have gotten it. Indeed, from 10 down to 14, got quite a few repeating characters. And of course, the first two characters are repeating throughout. The third character, you can probably see, is almost repeating from 10 to 14, with the exception of 13. So we'll come to that. We'll come back to that in just a moment. But you guys are right. This is identifying a section without a doubt. Looking at the English translation, you can see achieves from 10 down to 14. So you can see that there ought to be a dividing line between 14 and 15, because after the last line with achieves, line 14, Lao Tzu in the concluding section talks about something else, talks about things that don't last, things that become strong and then get old and perish, come to an end. So that's a different topic than from 10 to 14. So it makes logical sense for us to put a line between 14 and 15. Okay, so let me ask everyone this question. This is a trick question. What about between 9 and 10? Should there also be a line between 9 and 10? What do you think? Okay, I see that people are really on top of this. So let me showcase another repeat. This one, not as obvious in line 8, because it's the same two characters that you see in the beginning from 10 to 14, but it's in a different position. So it's a little bit harder to identify that. It's also, and the context is the same, achieving results. All right, so looking at the English translation, what it says, from line 8 onward, good commander achieves results then stops, does not dare to reach for domination, which is a continuing thought. And then it goes on to the 5 lines that we have already identified to talk about what a good commander does. Achieving results, but not brag about it, not flaunt it, doesn't get arrogant, etc. So it is now apparent that we have a section here. See, before line 8, it's talking about something else. It's talking about thistles and thorns, great army, inauspicious, etc. Not about the commander, but about what happens in the aftermath of war. So it makes logical sense for us to divide it up to identify a section that goes not from 10 to 14, but from 8 to 14. So that this whole thing, this second section from last, is all about the behavior of a good commander. In this case, the good commander is actually someone, a military commander who understands the Tao. This applies to the people around us and applies to ourselves as we live this life, that there's going to be conflicts as well. If you are a good commander who understands the Tao, then you will achieve the results that you're looking for without going overboard. So more on that later. Let's then take a look at lines 1 to 7. So I don't know about you, but we don't have as much luck in this case of identifying repeating characters from 1 down to 7. No easily identified repeating characters there. So what do we do then? Well, before we get to lines 1 to 7, one more item to bring to your attention is the following. I mentioned at the very beginning that from 10 down to 14, we almost have 3 repeating characters, but we have 4 repeating characters with 1 character being out of place. Let me show you. I used blue for that character, the 3rd character that's repeating itself, but not in line 13. So what about the character in line 13? Well, we have to look at the meaning. So the 3rd character is a negation character, like a no, a none, not. And then the 3rd character in line 13, actually the same. 不 is also a negation character. So this is actually synonymous. The 3rd character in line 13 is synonymous with all the repeating characters. So it's by meaning a repetition, but by character, one character is out of place. So just so everyone knows. Then let's go back to lines 1 to 7. There are no repeating characters that make it easy to identify a section, so perhaps we can treat the whole thing as one big section. Now, if we look at the meaning of the lines though, we can see a structure there. So for instance, looking at the meaning of lines 1, 2, and 3, lines 1, 2, and 3 are talking about the advisor to the king, or the emperor, as the case may be. So that advisor, someone who understands the Tao, would not dominate the world with soldiers because such methods tend to be returned, or in modern vernacular, we can say methods with soldiers, in other words, force, tend to backfire. So this is all talking about that one person. Then we talk about troops and the place where the troops camp, and then the army. So that's actually another topic. So I think it makes sense to everyone if I were to draw a line between 3 and 4. So we have a chapter here with 4 sections. Start out talking about the advisor, then talk about the army, where they camp, what they do, what happens, and what happens after they're gone. That's about the army. Then we talk about the commander, and then we talk about this overall observation in regards to life. So that's how we're set up for this chapter. Now it's time for the line-by-line analysis. In the past, I've done character by character. For this particular chapter, I want to do meaning more so than character. So you're not going to see a whole lot of references to what characters mean. You're going to see more of what the lines mean, the metaphors that are being used. Let's start with line 1. So this is going to be the start of a trend where we treat this chapter in 2 ways. For every line, every reference, whether it's the advisor here to the king, to the emperor, or the military commander a little bit later on, or the army in the next section, whether it's anyone, regardless of what we're talking about, it's always going to have 2 different layers. There's going to be the ancient context, and there's going to be the modern day context. Ancient context, in the world of kings, kingdoms, massive clashes between massive armies, that context from ancient times to modern times. Modern times meaning you are the king, you are the ruler. In this case, you also like a dream where, every person in the dream is a reflection of you. In this particular metaphor, every reference represents you. So you're the king, you're the emperor, but you are also the advisor who give advice to yourself. So let me talk more about that. Let's stick to line 1, and let's stick to the ancient context to start us off. So as I mentioned, in the context of ancient kings and emperors, this would be a trusted advisor or minister. So no big surprise there. The one who uses the Tao to advise the ruler. Now, what about today? What about not in the context of ancient kings and emperors, but the modern ruler of your life, you yourself? What about that context? Well, in this much more modern context, you are the ruler who makes decisions. You are also the advisor to the king or the minister to the king. That is, you provide yourself with advice. Well, how does that work? In the West, a lot of times we talk about the voice of conscience. So in a way, you are speaking to yourself, dispensing wisdom and advice to yourself through your voice of conscience. So what is the opposite of that? What would that voice be? The voice of the bad version of you, your evil twin. So in the West, a lot of times we have this idea that there are two little figures sitting on your shoulders. To one side is an angel, to the other side, the devil. The angel, of course, represents the better aspects of ourselves, the better angels of our nature, so to speak, and the devil, the opposite. So a little bit more about that in just a moment. So question, what kind of advisor are you to yourself? Well, here's what I think. If you study and practice the Tao, then the advice you provide to yourself is likely to be wise and effective. So what about the opposite? What if, how about the people that maybe aren't a part of this group, that don't know a whole lot about the Tao? What about them? Here's what I would say. Those who are unaware of the Tao may not be as fortunate. I think we're all very fortunate here. And the reason why I say they may not be as fortunate is because the results they get may vary. The results they end up with may be hit and miss, that sometimes it just happens to work out, other times there is a setback. So here's how I want to illustrate that in a slide that I call With or Without the Tao. So there you have it, the better angels of our nature to one side, the devil to the other side. So with the Tao, what would the angels say? The angel there representing the better angels of our nature. So what if you are facing some kind of material attachment? What if there's something that you simply want to hang on to? Well, the angel, or the part of you, the higher self, the inner master, the part that knows the Tao, that entity, the voice of reason, the voice of conscience may say, let it go and move on. It's excess baggage. It weighs you down. You don't need it. You don't need that attachment. You don't need that emotional baggage as you continue traveling on your personal sacred journey. You want to travel light so you can enjoy the journey more. Therefore, let it go and move on. Now, what about the topic of this chapter? Contention, conflicts. When there's friction in your life, when you are not a happy camper with someone else, that there's argument, there's fighting, the better angels of our nature, represented by little angel there, may say, oh, it's not that big of a deal. So forgive, move on, also let it go. Contention is, in a way, similar to attachments in that it can weigh you down and keep you from fully enjoying your trip, your sacred journey. So what about spirituality or awareness? Better angels of our nature may say, be present, may suggest, live with mindful awareness. That is, are you mindfully aware of what's happening right now? What's going on right now? What are we all doing? What is the state of our energy levels, our spirituality? Can we feel this Tao that's present in this group, that's moving all around, back and forth, suffusing everything? And how cool is that? So becoming aware, being present, being mindful. And when it comes to living life itself, the better angels of your nature, the part of you that understands the Tao, may say, well, listen, it's time to take joy in all the little things in life. So there are so many little things that we can name. And I'm talking about little insignificant things that don't really mean that much to other people. But if you look at them through the eyes of the Tao, every little thing is a cause for gratitude. If you're walking toward an elevator and someone notices you and holds the elevator door open, that's an awesome little thing right there. How cool is that? If you're driving and you're reaching an intersection and before you have a chance to slow down, the light turns green and you're able to safely go right across. That's a very little thing, but how cool is that? That's an awesome little thing as well. So I'm talking about keeping your eyes open to notice all the little things that the better angels of our nature would point out. So what about the other side though? I mean, we're talking about the Tao now. We're focusing on the yin and yang. We can talk about one without the other. So what are some situations where the devil would actually have some input that you may decide to accept or reject? So example, what happens when there is temptation? Temptation that perhaps on some level you feel like you should not succumb to, but on a different level, the devil says, it's okay, just a little bit, won't hurt anyone. And then of course, you find yourself on the slippery slope, as in, maybe just a little bit more, and it's okay. I give myself permission. I'm too hard on myself. And what about when you sense a difference between yourself and other people and you come out on the favorable end? Like, wow, I'm actually smarter than those guys. I'm actually better off. I'm actually better educated. The devil may say, yeah, I'm better than all of them. They are beneath me. That is the beginning, of course, of arrogance. Itself a slippery slope. Lastly, let's return to the topic of this particular chapter about conflict at all different levels, warfare, fighting, arguing, your battles with others. Well, the topic of revenge will come up. And the devil will suggest, yeah, just wait. I'll get them sooner or later. They will regret it. So this is what I mean by you being a different kind of advisor to yourself. We all have that choice. And our goal in this meeting, and hopefully many more future meetings when you and I get to talk together and chat about these topics, our goal is to emphasize the better angels of our nature and learning how to deal with the voice of the devil. In the Tao, of course, none of these things are personified. There is no actual entity that you can pray to. The entity that you can be sure exists is your higher self. So let me move on and talk about the next line. Line 2 says, does not dominate the world with soldiers. Once again, we're going to look at this from two different levels, the ancient context and modern day context of your life. Let's start with the ancient. In the context of the ancient ruler, this meant it was usually a bad idea to rely on military might. Instead, the wise king or queen, you may not know this, but yes, the ancient Chinese had been ruled by empress, not just kings and emperors. The famous ruler from Chinese history who was female, Wu Zetian, historical figure, and the ancient Chinese expression of girl power, right? So let's come back. When I say wise king, I think you already know I mean wise ruler, not wise male ruler necessarily. The wise king will be strong yet peaceful and adept at diplomacy and forging alliances. That's the context of the ancient ruler. Now I want to talk about you. So what's happening to you in this whole picture? In the context of your life, this means violence, threats, and intimidation are not the way to go. Just like it was usually a bad idea to rely on military might. The wise cultivator of the Tao, I hope that means you, the wise cultivator is not weak, but also not aggressive, and has no interest in bullying anyone. So that's how this applies to the different levels. As we go through the rest of the chapters, keep this dichotomy in mind. This is the paradigm with which we are understanding this entire chapter. Okay, let's move on to line 3. So line 3, I want to draw everyone's attention to the third character there. This character, Hao, is pronounced differently in traditional Chinese depending on context. It can be Hao, meaning good, or Hao, meaning like. Same character, slightly different sound. Because the difference is in pitch, English speaker may have trouble figuring out or understanding or hearing the difference between Hao and how. I'll give you some examples in just a moment. So first, let's talk about that character. How usually means good or well. Example, you can say 你好. So two characters, 你 means you, 好 means good. So it's a greeting. It's not exactly the equivalent of how when in English we would say, you good, you good, which is more like, everything okay, you doing all right? The you good, quote unquote, 你好, in this case is more like, hello, how are you? 你好. And sometimes when you expand it to 3 characters, it would be 你好吗? So in either case, 好 means good or well. You're doing well? Are you well? And that's one context with that pronunciation, 好. A frequently used character, one of the most frequently used characters in modern Mandarin. Other times, in traditional Chinese, it is said like 好. For instance, 好学, 2 characters. Second character means to learn. First character 好 means good, but in this different context, it means like. So when you say like learn, what you're saying 好学 is that I enjoy learning. I like to learn. I love to learn new things, 好学. So that's the second part of this bullet item here. Sometimes it is used to mean like, in the sense not similar to, in the sense of habitual behavior or preference. I like to learn, as one example. Or tendency. When I don't have anything to do, I tend to be learning because I like it. So what about here? In the ancient usage of Tao Te Ching, it means likely, not like, but likely in the sense of tendency or propensity. So if you plug that back into this line, such methods have a tendency to be returned, have a tendency to backfire. That's what it's trying to say. Here, it's talking about how violent methods have a tendency to circle back on the one who uses them. It's like when we say, live by violence, die by violence. Or when we talk about the circular functioning of karma. If you do bad things come back to haunt you. So bringing this back to lines 1 and 2, what the whole thing is saying is that don't try to dominate others with force, because this is the kind of thing that'll backfire on you. It'll tend to be returned to you. You try to force other people, you end up being forced by other people. And here, of course, the Tao, as it does everywhere else, is also functioning in circular ways. So there's a little bit more to say about that. We are now ready to apply it to the 2 contexts. What are those 2? The ancient context and the modern context. Let's start with the ancient. In the context of the ancient ruler, a kingdom that attacks other kingdoms will eventually become the target of counterattack, quite possibly from a coalition of its former victims. That is, the other kingdoms are sick and tired of your constant attacks. They decide to band together and give you a taste of your own medicine. So I think you can see how easily we can apply that in modern times to your life in the here and now. In the context of personal life, an aggressive person who tries to dominate others will create negativity that will return as karmic consequence and be seen by many as poetic justice. So, one thing that I often suggest to people is that they can go to YouTube and they can look up instant karma. There you see it in action every day, everywhere. Without this technology, without the internet and YouTube and how easy it is to upload, for instance, camera footage from your smartphone, without it, we wouldn't even know how widely prevalent it is for karma to function in such effective and circular ways. Sometimes the consequence of karma occurs immediately, hence instant karma. And of course, a lot of it has great entertainment value. I think everyone can get a chuckle or two looking up instant karma in YouTube. And probably we should also, as Dao cultivators, see that as warning that we don't want to be in the same position as these poor victims of instant karma. They decided to do something maybe underhanded, that perhaps they shouldn't, and then they reap the rewards or punishment immediately. Let's move on to line 4. So line 4 has an interesting character too, one that's frequently used, and I want to highlight that character and explain what it means. 诗 pinyin shi 诗. So many characters in Mandarin have only one meaning. This particular character has multiple meanings. Probably the most often used is this one that I'm showing you here. Teacher, 老师. So when you travel through parts of Asia, the Chinese-speaking parts of Asia, Mandarin-speaking parts of Asia, you will come across this term over and over again. Teacher, 老师. So there, 老, the first character means old or senior. And then the second character, 师, is the teacher part. So 老师 doesn't mean old teacher, it just means teacher. 老, old here is a term of respect in terms of seniority. Worthy of respect because of senior status in a subject, not senior status in terms of age. So 老师 is a respected teacher. So in Asian culture in general, the teacher is the subject of much respect. Let's go ahead and take a look at another usage. So 师 can denote mastery, as in 师父. 师父 is a master of a discipline such as spirituality, Buddhism, or martial arts. So all of those individuals, those masters, you can call them 师父. So in Mandarin, the same two characters, 师父, is pronounced in a slightly different way, 师父. So when the early Chinese migrants came to the West, that term came into the English language with the newcomers, and they said sifu, and therefore sifu becomes an accepted term, a term that people who study martial arts, qigong, tai chi, etc., they know Sifu is the master of that discipline. But in Mandarin, it's actually 师父 with the sh sound. Definitely, without a doubt, Mandarin is holding sway more and more over Cantonese. As an example, if you were to watch the Kung Fu Panda movies, the master in that movie, 师父, voiced by Dustin Hoffman, is with this exact pronunciation in Mandarin, 师父. Okay, one more, and this one I need to make sure you know is different. It can denote a profession or expertise, as in 师父. Now, if you paid attention to the pronunciation there, you may notice that is strikingly similar as 师父. In fact, the pronunciation is exactly the same. 师父. 师父. Well, if they sound exactly the same, well, how do you tell the difference? 师父 and 师父 can be told apart by context. The context of the conversation. If you are talking to a technician, a craftsman, even the driver of a vehicle, you may say 师父, and people know that you are denoting profession or expertise. If you are in a temple, in a dojo, and you're speaking to the resident master there, and you say 师父, by context, people know you're not talking about this, you're talking about this. You're talking about master. You can see visually that the character is completely different, but the sound is exactly the same in Mandarin. So what about here? What about in chapter 30? Let's bring it back to line 4 of chapter 30. 师 here does not mean teacher, does not mean master, nor does it mean someone in a certain profession or expertise, unless that profession or expertise is the military. Here, 师 means general or military leader, military commander. So there's a little bit more involved. It means that to begin with, and then there's a little bit more, which I'm going to share with you right now. 师 in line 4 specifically is extrapolated from military commander or military leader or the general, extrapolated from the general of the military to the army that follows the general's flag of command. So this is actually, 师 is actually talking about the army. So it's a little tricky, and you have to have enough knowledge in classical Chinese to really figure out the entire context, but it means army. So just a little bit more. And this is talking about the place where the army camps. Let's talk about that. The campground of the troops. Line 4, 师之所处. This is the first metaphor that plays an important role in this particular chapter. The campground of the troops is a metaphor for having malice in the heart, a willingness and readiness for contention. So this is how it is. Let me explain. When you're getting ready to battle someone, to argue with someone, to fight with someone, you shore up your anger and courage and the fight in you. You get ready to really give that person a piece of your mind. When that happens, it is as if an army has gathered in your heart, the seat of your emotions, and set up camp. That army, your fighting ability is getting ready to strike, to lash out. So the place where that army is camping, why? That is your heart. That is where you are gathering up all that energy, making yourself ready, psyching yourself up for battle. Okay? So here's the important thing. Lao Tzu sees absolutely nothing good in having troops camp out in your heart. That is for you to get ready to fight. Nothing good in that. And the reason why there can be nothing good associated with that is because malice can only bring about more of the same. So this is followed by more fascinating metaphors. I'm going to park it on this slide and get us ready for our mid-meeting break. We're going to take 5 minutes, and then when we come back, which ought to be about 11:33 or so, we'll continue this discussion about what it represents when an army is camping out in your heart and why that's always a bad thing, and what happens when that army goes into battle. So all of that coming up in 5 minutes. Let's go ahead and take a 5-minute meeting break. So we now want to take a look at line 5. Thistles and thorns grow. What does that mean? So these are not literal. I think you've already figured out that part. These are metaphors. And what are they metaphors for? They represent the self-damage that invariably happens when you harbor hate in your heart. So the idea is that this place, your heart, where the army is setting up camp, getting ready to attack, all these plants with prickly stems and branches grow so that the soldiers will hurt themselves. The idea is that even before the army attacks anyone, the place where the soldiers camp grow plants that can hurt them. So I think you begin to get the idea for this particular metaphor. Basically, Lao Tzu is saying that, listen, when you have this malice, this hatred in your heart, when that army ready to attack is camping out, you actually do damage to yourself. So if he were alive today, or perhaps traveled in time to address us, he may say it in the following fashion. Don't be a hater. In wishing to hurt others, you hurt yourself first. Now, I want to emphasize that this wisdom is not unique to Lao Tzu, nor is it unique to Asian cultures. This is an idea that is often repeated in different cultures because it's a pattern that becomes apparent to everyone in the course of time. So let me talk a little bit about how this wisdom has been expressed in different cultures. And a lot of times, I think because of misinformation, distortions, we will get the wrong idea about where the quotes actually come from. But I will present the research that track down where the true source is for these quotes. So first, the same wisdom has been expressed similarly in different cultures. In the West, one quote goes like this: resentment is like taking poison and waiting for the other person to die. Yeah, I love this quote because it's vivid and it's also very accurate. And when you see people who are resentful, who harbor a lot of negative emotions, you see this play out in real life. You see this person who is unhappy. The other people may be completely unaffected, but for sure they are inflicting a lot of misery and suffering upon themselves. So the insights from the people who are now participating, listening to this, applies very well. For instance, when you note that soldiers, when they camp out, they tend to destroy fields. They tend to leave a mess behind. Well, they tend to trample over everything. That's true. When you have this negative emotion in your heart, it's actually doing quite a bit of damage. So what about the source for this particular quote? Well, I have seen this quote being quoted as from a whole bunch of different sources, like Nelson Mandela, like Carrie Fisher, the actress. She wrote about it in a book, in one of her books. She's a talented writer. And I have also seen this quote credited to the Buddha. But it is actually Western in origin. There's no exact source because this particular quote has evolved and morphed over time. But in a book back in 1980 called The Angry Christian by Bert Gezi, he wrote, "Resentment is like a poison we carry around inside us with the hope that when we get the chance we can deposit it where it will harm another who has injured us. The fact is, we carry this poison at extreme risk to ourselves." So this is the earliest written example of this particular quote. It's not exactly like what we see here, which has been refined as it is passing from one person to the next on the internet. Resentment is like taking poison and waiting for the other person to die. Or the way that Lao Tzu would say it is like, when you have resentment, it is like an army has camped out in your heart, and thistles and thorns grow where they camp out. You damage yourself. That's the bottom line. So the same idea about how when you wish to do harm to others, you begin doing harm to yourself. That idea has variations. So there is another quote that I want to share with everyone. This one has also been seen quite a bit. So there is a television show called Criminal Minds. So one of the characteristics of that show is that they often have quotes spoken by different characters. So in season 1, episode 13, there's a quote. One of the characters, Gideon, says, "Confucius warned us, before you embark on a journey of revenge, dig 2 graves." So the idea is related to what we're talking about. The idea being that, well, when you're bent on revenge, when you have this hatred in your heart, then before you begin to do that, begin to take that journey of revenge, you got to get ready 2 graves, one for yourself. Because in trying to hurt other people, you hurt yourself. In trying to kill other people, you kill yourself. So this was in that particular television show. Now my reaction to that is different from the reaction from many other people. There are plenty of people who look at that and say it's one of their favorite quotes, and they repeat it to other people online. So if you look up this particular quote, I think you will see many references to it in Pinterest as an example. My reaction is different because I know what Confucius said. He said and wrote a lot, but he never said anything like this, anything similar to it. This is not a Confucius quote. Confucius never said that or anything remotely similar to it. The quote probably originated from Douglas Horton, American Protestant clergyman. So this is yet another example where a quote actually has a Western origin, but is somehow attributed to the great sages from the East. There are many other sayings like that. I would say the majority of the quotes attributed to Confucius, especially Lao Tzu, I noticed are things that these sages had never said. And there are also things still today within popular culture that we assume to be Chinese in origin, but are actually not. Probably the biggest example I can think of is when people say, "May you live in interesting times." And then they'll say, "This is an ancient Chinese curse." Now, I get that this quote is very applicable. Today, we live in interesting times, and we definitely feel cursed. But this is not an ancient Chinese curse. This is not anything from the ancient Chinese. So in a similar way, it's expressing ideas that are falsely attributed to the ancients. So back to chapter 30. By now, with these different quotes, I think you can tell exactly what I'm driving at. So the karma, the karmic action, is something that comes right back, is something that, you know, what we do to other people, we do to ourselves, basically. Here's what we can say with complete accuracy when it comes to the Tao. Harboring hatred, malice, or resentment in your heart, holding a grudge against others, will always be against the Tao that is taught by the ancient sages. So, indeed, that which you do to or for another, you do to or for yourself. Great quote. Thank you, Nicholas. And indeed, it's because the accuracy of quotes is so often questionable, it's better for us to be careful in believing the accuracy of the quotes, especially the source. So here we're saying having troops camp out in your hearts will always be against the Tao. I want to say it the other way. I want to say that on the positive angle, the Tao must always lead us toward peace. That means the way to handle negative feelings like hatred, malice, holding a grudge, the way to handle negative feelings is not to suppress or deny them, but to transform them into motivation that energizes your cultivation practice. It is possible to transform that negative energy into positive action. And in thinking of that, it occurs to me that there is a story that I can share with you. The name of the story is The Fortune Teller. So let me tell you this story. Once upon a time in China, there was a man who suddenly developed a lot of interest in fortune telling. He began studying the I Ching, palm reading, 八字, 紫微斗数, and other divination techniques that originated from ancient Chinese culture. This puzzled his friends because prior to that time, he had never been interested in these subjects before. So why now? Curious, one of his friends went to him to ask him, hey, I see what you're doing. Why the sudden interest? I've never seen you like this, studying all these techniques. You're so intense. What's going on? The man said, well, you see, a few weeks ago, I saw a famous fortune teller. He looked into my future. He did a reading for me. And then he told me that I would not live past the age of 47. So his friend was shocked. And then he said, oh, I see. So I understand now. You believe him, right? And that's why you are studying all these fortune telling techniques. The man said, no, it's the exact opposite. I don't believe him. I can't believe him. And that is why I'm studying all the techniques. I'm studying all the ones that are available because I am going to figure out how this stuff works. My goal is to prove that it's all lies and tricks, and then I will expose him as a fraud. So he spoke with intensity and anger, and then he continued his studies. Weeks passed, and all of his friends noticed he seemed less angry than before. Then when he started, sometimes he actually seemed a little bit uncertain, even fearful. So the same friend went to him again to ask him, like, hey, how's the plan going? The plan to learn fortune telling, how's that coming along? The man said, well, there was a lot to learn. None of it was easy, but I finally figured out most of it. His friend said, so what's the trouble? Your next step is to expose the fortune teller as a fraud, right? No. The man shook his head. He said, I used the techniques I learned on myself. See, I did several readings on my own future, and I also saw in my future that I would not live past the age of 47. I started out trying to disprove this fortune teller, but all that I have done is to confirm what he told me. So soon after that, the man stopped his study of the divination techniques, and he told all his friends. He said, well, now that I know I don't have a lot of time left, I may as well spend my remaining years doing something meaningful. So I'm going to devote my time to charitable work and not study any more of this. So he became very dedicated to his cause, and the charitable work became a great success. It expanded to a much larger scale, and this kept him busy all the time. All of this was another surprising development to his friends. They all felt that he seemed like a completely different individual. They knew him as a person who could be rather petty at times, had a mean streak, was prone to anger and outbursts. Now, somehow, he was different. he had this aura of compassion that was very natural and unforced. And that same aura also had happiness and peace. Indeed, the more this man worked on the charity, the more compassionate, happier, and peaceful he seemed to be. Years went by. This man made it past the age of 47, and then 48, 49, 50, and so on. So he was so busy that by the time his friend caught up with him again, he was 53 years old. So his friend saw that rather than being anywhere close to dying, he was actually more vigorous and healthier than ever. So noting that he was already 53 and 6 years past the year of his demise, 47, his friend said, well, obviously the fortune teller was wrong. He was wrong about you not living past 47. So you can definitely expose him as a fraud now. The man said, now why would I do that? I'm not going to do that. Why would I? If he hadn't warned me, I would have continued down the path that I was on with all the stress, all the tension, all the anger that I had before. There is no doubt in my mind I was headed for an early grave. He wasn't wrong about that. Thanks to his warning, my life went on a completely different path. I should thank him. The end. So let me talk about this a little bit. I hope everyone can see with this story how the Tao works. Harboring that army of anger in your heart, very bad for you. You advance your own cause and improve your own life, not by having the army camp out, i.e., holding a grudge, like the man did at first. You advance your own cause and improve your own life by transforming that anger or negative feeling into motivational energy to do something more meaningful with your life. Now, this story illustrates a pattern that I have personally seen many times. I have so many examples about that. Let me just relate a couple of these examples to you. These come from real life. These are what I have seen myself. So I know this. I have this good friend who started out visiting with a I Ching master. This I Ching master was extremely accurate, and everyone that knew him would often say that he had a 99.9% accuracy. So my friend used to bring all kinds of questions to him and benefited from him, from his advice in that way. And when my friend brought up this accuracy issue, 99.9%, the I Ching master said, well, you have to understand the 99.9% accuracy is only for the people who don't cultivate the Tao. So my friend was surprised. I mean, he was working on the Tao as well. He said, so what about the people who do cultivate the Tao? What is your accuracy level with them? I Ching master says, it's non-existent, it's horrible. So if someone has reached a level in Tao cultivation, I just don't bother doing readings for them anymore because it's not going to be accurate. It's going to be all over the map. It's going to be very random. I stick with the people who don't cultivate because with them, I'm always right. Nearly always. So time passed and my friend was out of work. And he was anxious to move on to another job. So he was out with his resume, looking for work, going to all different websites, visiting with different recruiting companies, communicating with different recruiters online. And he went back to the I Ching master and said, Master, I am really trying to find another job. Can you tell me when that's going to happen for me? So the I Ching master did some calculations and said, oh, I see. Summer, you will have a new job by summertime. So at the time that he asked, it was spring, so summer was just around the corner, so he was very happy to hear this. But then summer came and went. He still didn't have a job. So he had never known the I Ching master to be off like that before. So he went back to visit with the I Ching master again, and he said, I had no luck at all in summer. So the I Ching master did his calculations again and said, I see, you'll have something by winter time. So it was already autumn, so winter wasn't far away. So my friend went back to the job hunt. He increased his efforts, knowing that something good was just around the corner. Except that he was disappointed again. Next year rolled around, and winter transitioned back into spring. And he went back to the I Ching master to ask for advice, and the I Ching master gave him another prediction, the third one, telling him that a job will be coming up soon. You know, once the new year comes around, he should have one. It's going to happen soon. It's going to happen soon. And it didn't happen again. By this time, after 3 unsuccessful predictions, my friend had thought, well, perhaps it's a cause for celebration because he sees that he has actually graduated into that class of people who have cultivated the Tao to a certain level. And therefore, now become one of the people for whom the I Ching master is unable to make accurate predictions. So with that realization, he decided to no longer go back to the I Ching master and instead relied on his own guidance without getting that advice. Sure enough, when autumn came around again, he ended up with 2 job offers, both ideal from his perspective. He ended up accepting one of the job offers and later on told me that it was the ideal job for him. And throughout that entire process, he no longer relied on the I Ching master for guidance. Both job offers looked fantastic. He relied on his own intuition to pick one, and later on, he proved to himself that his choice was correct. So that's just one of the many examples. I also know quite a few other people who had gone to that I Ching master, who had asked for advice, who had success initially, but because they never cultivated the Tao after that, that early success did not break them out of the repeating patterns of their lives. They were still trapped in it, and later on would encounter adversity and don't have the ability, like Dao cultivators, to get themselves out of it. So because of that, I want to share with everybody that I'm constantly being asked about I Ching translation. So my friend who ended up with the job that he considers ideal, he's continuing on to practice the Tao. So he's still doing that today. He's still reaping the benefits from that. And the difference between now and back then is that he is walking around with a new confidence that I can perceive. That he knows he's the master of his own destiny. That rather than to ask a fortune teller for advice, he will simply move on to deciding what his destiny ought to be, and then he will be the author of that particular destiny. So this image here, this is the Chinese practice of palm reading. So you'll see many guidelines here. So for instance, this line right here, 生命线, that supposedly indicates how long you will live. And here's a line for emotions. Here's a line for wisdom, line for success, a line for marriage, and so on. This just goes on and on. So it's all fascinating, but I want to convey the message to everyone that in order to be the true master of your own destiny, you still need to cultivate the Tao. There is no substitute. I think it can be a lot of fun to consult with I Ching. I get that. But I want everyone to graduate to the point where you become a living oracle for yourself. That you know what's coming and you know what needs to be done. That is the ultimate level. So let's get back to 30. So the point that I wanted to make with the man who studied fortune telling arts was that he had resentment in his heart, but then he was able to transform that into something much more positive, and therefore he was able to create the life that he wanted well beyond the age of 47. Let's go to line 6. Following the great army. Again, I want to bring to everyone to two contexts, the ancient context and the modern context. So the ancient times context means that when the armies have clashed and the great armies have left the battlefield, this is the aftermath of the battle, where there's going to be vultures flying overhead, there's going to be rotting corpses, there's going to be infectious disease, there's burying the dead, treating the wounded, rebuilding from destruction so life could continue on. So the battle's done, the battle's finished, but the suffering and the misery continues on. That's what it's saying. So let's talk about the modern context. You don't command a massive army, but you do get into battles with other people. You do have conflicts sometimes. So what it means is that when you have conflicts, any conflict, it never ends well for any side. Not for the side who quote unquote lost, and not for the side who quote unquote won. And I put those in quotes because you never actually win. You never win because, as it says here, there will be a period of recovery and regrouping with lingering resentment and hatred. Those will guarantee that the seeds of future conflicts will be planted. In time, they will grow. So, historically, we have seen wars follow one another throughout history. We still have armed conflicts today in this world. In your life, it's the same. Just because an argument is over doesn't mean it's really over. Let's go to line 7. Inauspicious year. What is that? Well, it means that when we're talking about the aftermath of a battle, which in the personal context will be the aftermath of an argument, notice how a lot of times we say, hey, no hard feelings. But that's never true. In my experience, in my observation, there are always going to be hard feelings. Just by saying, hey, no hard feelings, that won't magically make the hard feelings go away. So, as I mentioned just a moment ago, historically, we have seen wars perpetuate over time. So at the personal level, we can also see arguments, even debates. Even when you say, hey, no hard feelings, I guarantee there's going to be cracks in the relationships, friendships. These cracks over time can widen into gaps, and they can eventually become too wide to mend. So that's the Tao perspective. This is always going to happen. It's never going to get better. So the best thing to do is to never get into arguments, even debates, in the first place. To illustrate that, I want to share with you a story that Tao masters will often tell. It's a story called Nails. So here's the story. Once there was a boy who went to the Tao sage for advice. He said, Master, I have a really bad temper. I am constantly arguing and fighting with friends and family. Afterwards, I'll regret it, but at the time it happens, I cannot control it. What should I do? So the sage instructed the boy to get a bag of nails. Specifically, the boy's instructions were that every time he got into another one of his arguments or fights, he had to take out a nail and hammer it into the wooden fence in his yard. Okay, that's simple enough. The boy could do that. Initially, the boy found that he was hammering quite a few nails every day. After a while, it became gradually less and less nails as he learned to control his temper better and better. He definitely discovered that it was actually easier to control himself than to hammer nails. So his progress continued until one day he went through an entire day without having to hammer any nails at all. So very happy, he reported this to the sage. The sage said, well, good. This is a very important turning point. From this point on, when you spend an entire day without having to hammer any nails, you will earn the right to pull out one nail. Let me know when all the nails are out of the fence. So this took quite a bit longer because sometimes the boy fell back on his old habits. He would raise his voice. He would get red in the face. Whenever that happened, some nails would get hammered into the fence, and it would take additional days of peaceful control for those nails to be pulled back out. Finally, after months and months of effort, the boy did it. All the nails were out of the fence. So again, very happy, he reported this to the sage. The sage said, you did well, but let's take a look at the fence together now. The sage said, look at all the holes you made when you hammered the nails. These holes will always be around, even after you've pulled out the nails. It's just like that. When you argue or fight with someone, invariably you cause some kind of damage in that person's heart, like the hole driven by the nail. Later on, no matter how you apologize, the nail may be pulled out, but the hole, like the wound of a stabbing knife, remains. It never heals perfectly. The knife wound leaves a scar behind. Now, the sage says, you see the reality of conflict. Before the conflict, during the conflict, and after. You can see it's not enough just to avoid losing your temper. You must also live your life better, more harmoniously all around, to not only avoid arguing and fighting, but also promote peace and harmony. The end. So everyone, I hope we can see how this bears upon the point that Lao Tzu makes. War is hell, and part of that misery and suffering continues on after the battle is done. So no matter how you pull out the nails, the holes remain. The best way to go in accordance with the Tao, as this chapter and the previous chapter both make clear, is to never attempt to dominate others in the first place. So lastly, I want to challenge you before we leave the story. I want to challenge everyone to look around at your own fence. Yeah, that wooden fence in the yard within. So how many nails are there? How many have you been able to pull out, leaving holes behind? I want to challenge you to take a look at that, and then perhaps come to the same realization as the boy, that next time you want to avoid hammering a nail, driving a hole deep into the wooden fence. That's the primary concept behind this story. Okay, so let's do a few more slides. Continue on this momentum that we're building. Next, I want to look at line 8 downward. And I want to point out this particular character. This character is 果. So in pinyin, we would write it like G-U-O, 果. This character means fruit, but here it's not fruit. In this particular translation, that character doesn't mean fruit. What does it mean? It means result. So this is very similar to the way that the English word fruit is used. In English, we will talk about the fruits of one's labors, or how hard work will at some point come to fruition. So when you talk about the fruits of your labors, you're not literally talking about literal fruits, actual fruits. You're talking about the results of your labors. Hard work will result in outcomes. So when a project comes to fruition, it is the results that you end up with. So in English, we use the word fruit to mean results as well. And that's how it is here in the ancient Chinese usage. So I want to make that clear. And then we can circle back to all of these lines one by one. So let's take a look at line 8. And let me focus on the meaning behind these lines here. Translation says, a good commander achieves results, then stops. I want to take it a little bit further and point this out. Dao cultivator is peaceful, but not necessarily pacifistic. Question to everyone, what is the difference between being peaceful and pacifistic? So in the Tao, the paradigm for peace is not turn the other cheek. It is more like peace through strength. And that's very well expressed in chapter 30. Chapter 30 is talking about a commander who is victorious in achieving a military objective, and yet is someone who wants peace, someone who does not wish to fight, will see fighting only as a last resort. And here it is. Warriors who understand the Tao would master their craft, which includes strategies, tactics, martial arts. Martial arts, of course, for individual personal combat, strategies and tactics to direct and command a force. They would master the craftsmanship in warfare, but they will use their deadly skills only as a last resort. Here, what this line says, line 8 and also the lines after that, line 9 and so on, what it says is that when these warriors of the Tao, when they need to fight, they do the absolute minimum necessary and then they stop. So there's no shock and awe, there's no overkill, there's only what is necessary. And I see that many people who are listening do understand the difference between being peaceful and pacifistic. I have to be peaceful, but still be able to stand up for yourself when necessary. That's excellent. I also have being peaceful means having peace as a goal, whereas pacifism sees peace as the means and the goals. Yeah, so there are different forms of pacifism, but there's definitely the extreme pacifism where all forms of violence is absolutely, summarily rejected. We'll get to that in just a moment. So I want to direct your attention to line 9. It says, does not dare to reach for domination. So here I want to talk about what happens when a warrior of the Tao has achieved an objective and stops. What happens then? So this is what I would point out to the Tao cultivator. There's no pleasure, delight, or glory in defeating an opponent. So what is the mindset? What is the mentality? Well, if anything, there is regret and remorse that a lack of diplomatic skills made it necessary to fight. To have to fight someone means that you have failed to make a friend. That is a real failure. That is a failure that a Tao cultivator would take seriously. Therefore, in the aftermath of a conflict, cultivators of the authentic Tao tradition would not be celebrating, but would be reviewing. They review their past actions because they want to figure out how they can manage things better next time. So that next time something similar comes up, they want to figure out how they can avoid having to get into yet another conflict. To be in a conflict is bad news. It means you have not succeeded. So victory is not success to the Tao cultivator. Having to fight is a failure of sorts. Okay, so quite a bit more that we should talk about. In the next few lines, we talk about the commander achieving results but does not brag, does not flaunt, is not arrogant, achieving results but only out of necessity, and does not dominate. So these are all important concepts to cover, and you will see, as I pointed out, that some of these are reiterated multiple times because of the importance that Lao Tzu sees in the concept. So we're down to the last part of the meeting, and I want to give some time to make sure we can cover the summary. For today's summary, I want to provide reminders from Tao Te Ching 30. Specifically, you've seen how we switched back and forth between the ancient context and the context of your life. What I hope to convey is that it's very important to not just study these concepts, but also apply them in everyday living. So I specifically want to remind everyone in the summary how to apply the Tao in this chapter. There are two parts. One, disband the army in your heart. And I hope everyone gets this reference now. I'm talking about the campgrounds for the troops, where the army camps out in your troops, meaning harboring feelings of resentment and hatred and holding a grudge against someone else. So to disband the army in your heart means letting those negative feelings go. And here, I want to ask everyone to observe and notice. Notice how people are not able to do this. Notice whenever you go online, notice how easy it is to find malicious and hateful comments on the internet. There's a lot of them. So those who enter those comments, they have the army camped out. They want to pick a fight or argument with someone, but they are drinking poison and they will damage themselves before they can possibly hurt other people. Most people just don't realize that this is the case, that they are damaging themselves. They're not actually doing harm to other people. Then I want to challenge everyone to resolve to be different from most people. Yes, it is possible that you yourself may be someone who has entered in malicious comments on the internet. That's a possibility. My challenge to you would be to refrain from doing that, to understand that Lao Tzu is conveying this concept for your own good. So that being said, I want to also talk about the other side of it, that even when you're not in a conflict, even when you are only interacting with other people, maybe helping them, notice that when you help someone, it can be an opportunity to experience arrogance. So my challenge will be for you to treat others in a gentle and considerate way. That you can be just as courteous before as well as after. Specifically, I want to challenge you to take extra care and give people the gift of dignity. Yes, perhaps they needed your help. Yes, perhaps you have done something out of necessity to overcome their objections. If so, I want you to stick to the Tao of humility and treat them with the gift of dignity.
Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us travel safely. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.